Good evening, everybody. My name is Sarah Clift, and I teach here at the University of King's College. It gives me such great pleasure to welcome you all to King's this evening. And on behalf of both the University of King's College and, I promised Paul I would say this, the King's College Co-op bookstore, I welcome you all heartily to the college. Thank you also for braving the cold and the snow, and apparently it's going to plummet to Arctic temperatures while we're in here. So thank you for coming out this evening for a very special event. I promise you won't regret it. Now, before we get started with this evening's proceedings, I'd like first to welcome Mi'kma'ki Elder Billy Lewis up to the podium and to request that he bless our evening's proceedings. So thank you, Billy.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I went by the bookstore today in anticipation of checking out the book. So I haven't read it yet, so I can't speak to it. But the whole idea of us bringing all these issues together at this time is so important. And that's what I hope that we get out of this evening, is where our issues not only cross, but where they fill in together, and we have to support each other, and especially with what's going on now in Wet'suwet'en. So, first of all, I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to the land defenders and the water protectors that are defending our land at this time, and as we have over the years, and especially as well, and I'm going not knowing what Mr. Cole might say, but just that we really have to stop and think when we see all the things that are going on. I'll tell you one thing that happened recently that made it come full circle for me. I was looking at the response to the coronavirus, and one woman from the ship that was marooned and talking about the effect it had on her, and then the news item interviewed other people that had that same thing. Well, I would ask everyone to consider, the truth of that. If you're taken in an institution and put in a cell, as some of our brothers and sisters have for years, in total isolation. So if you think a couple days on a ship are bad, just imagine what the time is when you have years and years, as some of our brothers in the States have done, and here in Canada as well. So we got to remember to think about those broader issues at a time like that, of that kind of segregation and isolation complete is a symptom of what's wrong with everything. Like, they still haven't got around to stopping that in the juvenile institutions, for heaven's sake. But anyway, I only bring that up just to show that when we're looking at the news and the radio, to take a look at it in that broader perspective and not just take the word of what we see on the screen or listen on the radio. So I hope tonight, well, I know tonight that we'll be informed of a lot of that, and I hope that everyone in this room takes those messages and goes out and brings them to life. Walaliok. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. I, too, on behalf of King's College, would like to acknowledge that our event this evening, as well as the institution hosting it, is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Friends wiser than myself have taught me that we should always seek to couple our land acknowledgements with an action item of some kind. And in that spirit, I'm thinking about how tonight's event and the book whose launch we're celebrating here helped to challenge the flattering and self-congratulatory narrative that Canada tells about itself, and to shed light on the colonial and racist violence that continues to underpin that narrative up to the present day. Now I have the very great honor of introducing one Dr. Lynn Jones, who has generously agreed to be our moderator for this evening. Dr. Jones was born and raised in Truro. She almost needs no introduction, really, but I'm gonna do it anyway. She was born and raised in Truro, Nova Scotia, educated here in Halifax, and has really spent her entire working life devoted to causes and organizations that seek to eradicate racism, secure human rights, and achieve fair labor practices. Now, Lynn's long list of achievements and activities include work as a trade union member and advocate, and as the first Black person to join the executive ranks of the Canadian Labour Congress. In 1993, Lynn became the first Canadian-born African-Canadian woman to run in a Canadian federal election as the New Democratic candidate for the Halifax area. Now, since her retirement in 2011, Lynn continues to be active. For instance, she is currently chair of the Nova Scotia chapter of the Global African Congress, which seeks reparations for the transatlantic slave trade and other injustices. Folks might also be interested to know that the Global African Congress Nova Scotia chapter is also the organization behind the groundbreaking work authored by children called R is for Reparations. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that amazing piece of work. Now, though I could go on and on about Lynn, I will just say that she has been honored with many awards over the course of her working life, including the Queen's Medal, the Congress of Black Women of Canada's Women of Excellence Award, the 100 Black Women of Canada Award, the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour Human Rights Award. So that's just to name a few. So please help me welcome Dr. Lynn Jones to the podium.
Thank you so much. It reminds me, that kind of welcome reminds me of time that I spent on the continent in Africa. And I just love attending events and big events like this event, where you actually have professionals who come to your event to cheer on whoever it is that's going to speak. So little did you know that I brought my African heritage with me and actually paid people to give me this kind of introduction. So thank you. This is such an exciting evening. Have any of you been listening to the news and to the radio interviews and the paper interviews about the fact that we actually get to host Desmond Cole and his book, The Skin We're in Halifax tonight? Any of you caught it? Give Desmond a round of applause. He's a really humble person, and he doesn't appreciate how we feel about him, and his acts of resistance, and how he has supported so many of the activities that have taken place, not only in Canada, but internationally, that relate to African people all over the globe. It's not an easy task and an easy position to be in. And if you notice, we have some posters and bookmarks and things around one of the elders who just happens to be my brother, just happens to be, who I got to see firsthand what it's like when you go against the grain, and that you're constantly trying to advocate on behalf of so many people. And it's dangerous at times, and only those who are in those positions of activism really can relate to how much energy and effort and love that occurs in doing this kinds of work. The organizers said we'd be amiss if we didn't talk a little bit about some of the activities in the African Nova Scotian community, and someone over there already is nodding their head, that we've been engaging in that relate to the very topics that are covered within the skin that we're in. And I just took a moment, and I had to put my pen down, because I could have went on for years and years about just the activism that's taking place over a very short period of time, because Desmond's book, I mean, it covers the year 2017, is it not? Mm-hmm. And I can tell you in this last week for African Heritage Month how many activities of resistance and power even that have taken place. But some of you will probably recognize some of the things that we've been doing in this community and some of the activists. Anybody here remember the activism around street checks, Nova Scotia? Raise your hands if you remember or if you've been involved in, and the incredible amount of work and effort and the reports that came out as a result of it. Issues around environmental racism that takes place in African Nova Scotian and our Indigenous Aboriginal communities. Anybody involved or environmental racism? Put your hands up again. Well, it looks like we need more activists and work that takes place in terms of the resistance, because it's forever a topical issue. And in fact, we just had an issue down in Shelburne where they were trying to get clean water into the African Nova Scotian community. And very happy when Ellen Page got on board to try to get in the south end of Shelburne clean water into that area. And we just heard within the last couple of days that the town of Shelburne has finally agreed, because Ellen put in more money, to locate that well where the Shelburne community will have clean water that will run straight through the Black community and the rest of the town. So give a round of applause for that activism and racism. I see Dr. Isaac Saney. I know he's in this room somewhere. I saw his hand. Well, we took on not only the community, the provincial government, and ended up on a national level as a Black community with an initiative that talked about the banning of the Confederate flag in Nova Scotia, in fact, all in Canada. And Isaac was very instrumental in leading, so give our brother up there a round of applause. There was resistance. Anybody know? Because, you know, sometimes it's easy to look in other people's houses without looking in our own house, right? In terms of injustices that are taking place. Well, we've had the group called Voices from the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children, the residents of the home, who challenged the government and the home about the ill treatment that they received in the home. And we just had a full report and compensation that took place as a result of that? Anybody involved in the part of that initiative? Or has heard, anybody heard about what happened in our own, or really hard as a Black community sometimes to look within as to what has taken place. I had a kind of a neat title for what happened to me recently, but it has happened to the others. And as I was reading through Desmond's book, which he's going to get into, and he's going to read it, but I love this line in the book that says, Black people are not wanted in Canada. Anybody read that in the book? It is so true, and I can give you so many incidents of how we're not wanted. And one in particular was something we entitled, or I guess I entitled, Watching Deer While Black, where there was a situation where we were in our own community, my own African Nova Scotian community, and I call it carded by the police and told that there were suspicious people, not activity. So I was suspicious in my own community, and that was another bout of activism and resistance that we had to employ. So give me a hand of applause. I just attended even last week, like this activism never ends. I was asked once, they named me, they said, oh, you're an activist. There was some book somebody was writing, and they talked about me saying, oh, you're an activist. And I said, I don't know if I like that term, because I didn't name myself that. I don't know if I like it. But I had said to them, you call it activism, whereas I call it survival. So it's all from the perspective from which you come. And this very past week, I actually was in Pictou County, where I was attending the sentencing for the person that had shot, what do you call those things? Nail gun. A young African boy, NH is the name he preferred to be called. Literally, his life didn't matter. And for once, it was determined that the person is guilty. So because of the snow, I drove all the way up to Pictou. The case was postponed. And we still, it's the second time that I drove up to Pictou, but nonetheless, got up there, it was postponed, so we still don't know what that sentencing will entail. Desmond, I'm sure, had something in his book about that, the fact that even though we won in the sense that the person was deemed to be guilty, race was not discussed as a factor in the case, when in my mind, it was all about race. So those are just some of the things that are going on in Nova Scotia. Don't get angry if your activism wasn't highlighted in my little synopsis. So therefore, all of you people out there who have been at the forefront of the activism and the resistance, can you just stand up and give yourselves a round of applause? So all those involved in activism and resistance, stand up, there's more. There's more people. Come on, Monty Sheree.
Amina, where are you at?
Stand up. And we do thank you, because the world is a better place because of the work that you're doing. So at this time, I get the distinct pleasure of introducing our panel, and certainly our guest of honor. They asked me a certain order, but I never follow directions. So I am going to first introduce Lynn Jones.
Woo!
Get off that phone.
Santina's trying to find the building.
Someone's trying to find the
Everybody's
building.
lost trying to find us, so I have to go collect people. Santina's actually outside. I'm going to go find her as well.
This is classic Al.
Well, we'll introduce her anyway. Al Jones is a poet, educator, journalist, and advocate. She was the 5th Poet Laureate of Halifax and held the 15th Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University from 2017 to 2019. She currently teaches at St. Mary's University, Mount St. Vincent University, and in every journalism program at King's. Now, she neglected to say how many programs there were, but nonetheless, she teaches in every one of them. She's a co-founder of the Black Power Hour, a radio show developed collectively with prisoners. She was a 2016 winner of the Bernie Rocky Jones Human Rights Award. Her advocacy and work fights anti-Black racism in Canada, walking in the path of our great-grandmothers who resisted relentlessly. Her book of poetry and essays, Canada is So Polite, is being released in the fall from Gaspereau Press. Please give it another warm welcome. Thank you. And our guest of honor tonight will actually introduce the other panelists in case you think I've forgotten, because I haven't. So I'll now introduce our guest of honor. I feel so good about being able to do this. Desmond Cole. Desmond Cole is the winner of the 2017 PEN Canada Ken Philco Prize, awarded to an individual who has advanced free speech in Canada. Desmond rose to national prominence following his viral article, The Skin I'm In, which addressed racial profiling. A relentless community advocate, Desmond resigned his column at the Toronto Star. That means he quit. After being asked to choose between his activism for the Black community and journalism. His advocacy has been devoted to challenging police and state violence and anti-Blackness. A documentary featuring Desmond, The Skin We're In, aired on CBC and has been nominated for numerous awards. Desmond hosted a show on News Talk 1010 for 5 years. Imagine this, you'd never guess it. The Skin We're In is his very first book. So I also ask you to give a warm welcome to Desmond Cole. It's all yours.
Wow. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
You can say it back.
Good evening.
That's it. We're all here together, right? So, thank you so much, Lynn. My heart is so full of stuff right now. I've been working on this book, which is now out, literally for years, and imagining certain days that would come after I finished writing it. And I have been imagining sitting here with all of you, not knowing exactly what it was going to look like or how it was going to feel like for years. So I am beyond like any possible expression of how special this is, how grateful I am to every single one of you for being here this evening, This is literally a dream come true for me. So thank you all for sharing it with me. We're here tonight to talk about this book, and I know that. And there's so many other things, right, that we want to be able to do during the course of this evening, and to get you home before the world freezes on all of us. The first thing that I would like to do is for us to all acknowledge that it was on this day 6 years ago that a 26-year-old Inuk woman named Loretta Saunders was murdered by two people that she had subletted her apartment to. Loretta was a university student. She was studying in a place like this to try and better herself and to better her Inuk community and Indigenous peoples across Canada, and her life was taken from her. She was taken from her family. And we are here to reckon with colonial violence. So I would just ask us to take one moment in memory of Loretta Saunders. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that very much. I want to open this evening by reading some of the book to you. I'm going to read from two different chapters of my book. The way that I have structured this is that there are 13 chapters in this book. Every chapter is a month of the year 2017, as Lynn mentioned. I was writing this book in large part while I was living it in 2017 and then immediately afterwards. And I wanted to do that because I wanted it to be immediate. I wanted it to be something that felt current, felt like the stuff that we're going through right now, but I also wanted to connect it back to our past, to our histories as Black people in this country. Every chapter of the book represents 1 month of the year 2017. But then there is a 13th chapter because something pretty special happened in January of 2018, which we're going to talk about. And because we were still living and I was still writing it, I thought I wanted to add this chapter as well. But I'm going to read you from April and from October. In April of 2017, as Lynn mentioned, I left the Toronto Star. I quit.
You quit.
I quit. Feels good to say it. I did that because the Toronto Star tried to put me in a really awkward situation where they said, you're trying to be a journalist and an activist at the same time, and you essentially have to pick one of those. For the record, for anybody there are some journalism students here tonight, I know. We need to talk about this further, but that is a myth. The idea that there is something called an objective journalist that doesn't have feelings or opinions or ideas and is not allowed to share them, that's a myth. Even which stories get put on the news and which don't is a political decision. People argue, they fight, they make their case, and then they have to decide. I think that this whole thing about being neutral or objective is really about hiding behind the decisions that you have to be responsible for making as a journalist. So I am responsible for the decisions that I make. If people don't like it, they don't have to, but there's no such thing as neutral when we're talking about our human lives here. So I'm going to read you from the chapter where I took a stand at a police board in Toronto over the issue of police carding, one that you are all very familiar with, I'm sure, in this room. And then I'm going to read you from the chapter in October, because it was in October of 2017 that I was able to make my second visit to North Preston. Some of the people who were with me that night are in the room. They are in this book. And I would like to share with you some of what happened that night in North Preston when I was visiting a Black community program that had been started in the community by two young women. I'll start with April. On April 20th, 2017, I attended a meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board the civilian group tasked with directing the police. The meetings are held at Toronto Police Headquarters, and this meeting's agenda included some procedural motions about carding. It was common practice for activists to speak in front of the board. You get 5 minutes, and the more critical or inflammatory your comments, the stricter the enforcement of your time limit. After covering the police board for several years as a journalist, I'd more recently stopped writing about meetings and had begun attending mainly to speak directly to issues. As I took my seat at one end of the board table, I had a plan. I argued that by allowing carding to continue, the board had once again betrayed residents, especially the black youth police so often target. I said the board's greatest betrayal was its decision to leave all historical carding data in police custody. Excuse me. Not only did this policy ignore the fact that the policy should never have collected the data collected this personal information in the first place, but by allowing the police to continue to have access to the database, the policy enabled the use of the information by police in the future. I told board members and Chief Saunders, quote, "I plan to stand here in protest until you commit today, here and now, to restricting the police from having our information," end of quote. As I finished my comments, I stood with one fist in the air in a Black Power salute. I think the board members thought I was joking. One of them, Ken Jeffers, asked me some questions that had nothing to do with my remarks about the database. After our exchange, I kept my place at the table. Board Chair Andy Pringle asked me to go back to the public gallery so the meeting could continue. I refused. Pringle then called a recess, and Saunders and the board members all left the room. I stood there alone, focusing on the doors, trying to ignore the media perched near me with cameras and microphones. After 12 of the longest minutes of my life, the board members returned. They took their seats, only to vote to adjourn the meeting.
Oh dear.
As they stood to leave, board members and city councilor Shelley Carroll gestured at me with an open palm as if to say, "Now look what you've done." I was leaving with friends who had been in the public gallery when, as if to prove exactly what I'd come to protest, 4 uniformed officers entered the room to see me out. The meeting was over, I was leaving, and if it's illegal to linger inside a meeting room to contemplate the coming apocalypse, I should have been arrested long ago. On this day, I left with my friends before the police could put their hands on me. That was April, and I go on to talk in that chapter about being called up to the Toronto Star's offices afterwards to be told what a bad boy I was being, so. But you have to buy the book to get that part. Now I want to read you the chapter, part of the chapter for October, and my visit to North Preston. The drive up North Preston Road during an October sunset, with Long Lake onto the left and rows of autumn colors on the right, was perfect. This was my second visit to North Preston, Nova Scotia, a town of about 900 residents, most of them the descendants of Black loyalists. I was excited to reconnect with 2 young people who'd welcomed me a year earlier and taught me about their community. Lamia Reddick and her sister Khadija Provo took me on a walk through their town in 2016. They told me about the racial profiling tactics employed by police in the area, such as RCMP officers setting up checkpoints on the main road into town to stop and question cars that enter and leave. They also spoke of negative stereotypes of the community in the media. A story that had stuck with me was about the local parish church, St. Thomas United Baptist Church, that for a long time had doubled as a community center. The church was still there, but it was no longer an open community space. There was a government-run community center across the street in a building that doubled as the RCMP facility, with a door connecting the two spaces. Lamia said that kids still used it, but it wasn't always a welcoming spot. She and Khadija dreamed of having an alternative space for youth in the neighborhood. A young activist named Amina Abawaji was driving me back to North Preston that evening in 2017. Her younger sister, Aisha, rode in the back seat. I'd met these two young Muslim women, as well as Lamia, Khadija, and nearly everyone else I knew in the Halifax area through Lynn Jones, a professor, poet, author, and anti-prison activist who seemed to be connected to half the black people in Halifax. Just as they were in Toronto, young women in Nova Scotia were leading many of the political and social struggles for black life. We arrived at Lamia's family home around twilight. Lamia and Khadija were there along with several teenagers from the area. More kids were rolling in as we settled in the basement. And by the time our hosts were ready to begin the programming, I counted 17 black teenagers. Lamia and Khadija had done it. A year after we'd met, they'd succeeded in using the little space they had for community programming. I'd come on a good night, they told me. This was the most youth who'd ever attended at one time. To accommodate us all, we split into two groups. We ate, talked about the meaning of friendship, and played a couple of games. I watched as our hosts dealt with a conflict in the room. At least two young people didn't want to be around each other. The conflict wasn't resolved that night, but Lamia and Khadija got the kids to agree to share space without bothering one another. Once the programming was over and the youths went home, I asked Lamia and Khadija how they'd managed to put this all together. They had no access to outside funds or institutional support. They said they'd paid for the food themselves and designed programming based on conversations with the youths. For example, in one session, the group had watched a video of a teenage Tupac Shakur reflecting on childhood and masculinity, and then the youths had a discussion about it. Thanks to the efforts of Lamia and Khadija, I associate North Preston with black kids laughing in a partly finished basement like the one I grew up in, eating chicken and talking shit and playing on their phones. Thank you. So this is really special for me because my homie Lynn Jones, who I met about 3.5 years ago, who I talk about here in this book, is sitting with me here, has been one of my greatest comrades and friends over the last several years. All of you know the work that Elle does in this community, but then at the same time, you probably don't know all the work that Elle really does behind the scenes. She never stops. And so many things are due to my sister here that you don't have right now, including, and I'm gonna say this on this stage, how in the world do you not have a tenured position at a university in this province? Elle, I'm never gonna stop fighting for you because you never stop fighting for all of us. And somebody that you have introduced me to is actually sitting over there. Matthew, my brother, welcome. It's really nice to see you here. And I'm also really, really honored, along with Lynn, who has been doing this work for such a long time and who continues to lead and challenge us and inspire us. I'm also really honored to be sharing this stage with Fatouma Abdi sitting next to me. had to write the last chapter of this book January 2018, because that month, a young man named Abdul was taken into the custody of the Canada Border Services Agency, and we were really afraid that he was going to be sent away from our country. And the only reason that he wasn't was because of the leadership of his aunt, Asha, and my sister, Fatouma, right here, who led the charge in the media, in teaching us as activists about the situation and what was going on, and making sure that we didn't give up the fight. What happened in that first week of January 2018 still feels like a fairy tale to me. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't even feel like it really happened. Again, you're gonna have to read the book. But Fatouma, you also have taken on a lot and sacrificed a lot. And there's still so much in this world that we as Canadians owe you, including citizenship in this country, and we're not going to stop fighting for you until you get there. So I'll hand it over, Lynn. You know, let's do this.
Well, this is not scripted in the manner that you would normally think it would be. We do things differently in Nova Scotia, do we not? Yes. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it actually over to Elle to share some thoughts and ideas, first of all, about her experiences and any comments. And then we do have some questioning, but we'll start with Elle.
Okay, well, I actually am going to ask a question to Fatouma since she's sitting up here. But Fatouma, one of the things that is in the book, and I don't want to ruin too much because I know Desmond's trying to hold it back from you so that you all buy. But I don't think it's a secret that you stood up to Prime Minister Trudeau in January in a moment that I've been saying I think should be in our money. So could you just tell us a little bit about doing that? That was still, to me, that is still the most inspiring and courageous moment I've seen. And I just wanted you to maybe just tell us a little about what went into that moment when you were standing there.
Well, it was all about Abdul, my brother, who was facing deportation, as everyone knows. And we were doing a protest that I felt like us being outside wasn't really doing much. So we went inside, and I was scared. But I wanted to say something to him and bring attention to it to try to stop the deportation. And he tried to skip us. But the microphone was brought to me, and me getting up and saying literally like 5 words did so much that I would never thought that it would have done. So, like, I don't want to ruin your book. But
Tell us.
But I asked him if it was his child, would he stop the deportation? And he didn't answer me, but I feel like us doing that really helped my brother's case and helped him be where he's at today. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Fatouma. And the reason why we want to uphold Fatouma so much, she's so humble and she's so nervous every time she speaks, and she always hates me for dragging her and making her speak. But, you know, when you see activism, even when you read a book like this, people get an idea of, you know, oh, it must be this thing that's beyond me. And Fatouma, it was just love. You were 7 months pregnant at the time. You were in a high-risk pregnancy, but you loved your brother and you were putting yourself on the line for it, and you just, despite being so nervous and never having done anything like that, you stood and you looked at Trudeau and you asked this question, and it really sparked a movement, not only among the rest of us, but I don't know if people know this, but the law changed in Nova Scotia because of Fatouma's advocacy. Now children who are in the child welfare system, they have to get the citizenship for them, and that didn't exist before, and that was a change that became because of you, Fatouma. So you got to get to your feet for Fatouma. going to stop embarrassing her now, but feel free to jump in anytime. Desmond, I guess I'm going to turn to you on this question. You were talking about in your book, in one of the readings that you shared with us, you talked about this tension that shouldn't exist but does exist between being a journalist and being an activist, and the way that those are held in different places. And I wonder if you could speak about the ways in which that comes together, the responsibilities of Black writers in our communities.
Yeah. Especially in journalism, there's pressure, right? There's pressure as a Black person to do this professionalism thing. But what professionalism and objectivity and neutrality really means is viewing things from a white colonial perspective. Let's just be honest about it. That's what it means. It means that what's happening right now is more or less normal. So Black people getting stopped in the street, more or less normal. Black people being deported after being here since they were children, more or less normal. The prisons being full of Black and Indigenous people, even though we make up a tiny fraction of this country's population, more or less normal. So when you report, you're encouraged not to make a big deal out of those things, but just to view them like, well, that's how it is. Not to say that it shouldn't be like that. And it's especially pressure on us when we come from those communities because they're afraid of us. They're like, you want to get in here so you can tell your Blackity-Black stories. And it's like, yeah, I do, actually, yeah. So they put even more pressure on us to not do it. And a lot of us who want to get through school, where this pressure starts, I want to be clear, journalism students who are Black tell me all the time, this stuff starts even before you get into the workplace. But in order to get through school, in order to get that job, you deal with that pressure and you try to balance, how do I balance speaking out for myself or for my community with wanting to stay in these institutions, wanting to have work, wanting to get a good grade, all that stuff. The reason that I left the Toronto Star, the biggest reason, was because I didn't want our industry to think you can take our work for granted, you can treat us however you want to, and we'll just keep coming back because we're so desperate for the job. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to hurt them because they used my face on the front page of that newspaper in 2015, the day I started writing for the Toronto Star. And they're like, look, we recruited a Black person to write for us. Aren't we wonderful? But then when that Black person wanted to do his real thing in the world that he was doing the whole time, which they hired him for, when it got too close to people in power, then they were like, oh, we didn't want you to do it that much though, Desmond. So I took a hit so that they would be scared to do that to us again in the future. And I don't know if that worked, but I also wasn't going to allow them to continue using my face and my own work and credibility to boost their racist actions at the newspaper. I know that's a really hard choice for us to make in our daily lives. I know a lot of people face discrimination in the workplace and they can't do what I did. They can't walk away because they have children to feed. They can't walk away because they have to pay bills. It's not that I don't, but I'm in a different situation where I survived. I was able to cobble through, and it's because of people like you, Ellen, because of a lot of other people that I did survive. But I'll just put it to everybody this way, and I kind of alluded to this before. When you watch the news, let's take what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, and every single day it's like coronavirus, coronavirus, coronavirus. You're going to get sick. Everybody's going to die of disease. Is that just everybody agrees that that's the only story or the number one story? No. Somebody in a newsroom is like, this is going to get him scared. This is going to get him talking. Now, there is a news value to it. I'm not going to lie. There's obviously a public interest in knowing what's happening with this virus because nobody's seen it before. But at the same time, there's lots of other things that are happening all the time that we don't cover like that. And I just don't want us to pretend, Elle, that if you want to talk about Black issues, that now you're biased. But if you want to talk about coronavirus or a cat getting stuck in a tree, that's normal journalism. Our stories are part of this narrative of being Canadian as well.
Yeah, the reason I also wanted to start there is that you got this book deal in 2015.
That's right.
And it's coming out in 2020. So there was a long time between that. And I was there for a lot of that. And one of the things that I guess bothers me on this kind of double consciousness level is that now, today, you're going around the country, you're celebrating, you're on the national news, and everyone's like, Desmond, Desmond, Desmond. But we both know that there were so many times when this thing you were doing made you a, quote, arsonist of the community, unquote, someone who likes to burn things down and not build. There's a lot of high costs around that. And so one of the questions I always have as a writer is how to keep doing this work that one part of you, all part of you knows is important to do, and knows needs to be done, and knows that no one else can and will do. But at the same time, there's so many ways you're gaslighted about that work, whether that's being told that it's not real journalism, whether that's like being unable to get jobs, whether that's the way that people treat you like this, lunatic at the center of the community. So one of the things I also think about this book is that it's a healing book in many ways. A lot of people are focusing on, obviously, it exposes Canada's racism, this is what this book is about. But I also think about that act of what it means to sit down and write that book through all of this, through everybody that, holds you up really briefly and then downs you for like 4 years, and then, I will celebrate you again. But in between that, there was so much of the struggle just being there to get these words to the page. And I just wanted to acknowledge that as well, because I know how hard that was, how many broke days there were, all of that. And I also think we need to talk about that, because people, especially young people, I think, sit in these audiences and they want to write a book, or they want to be an activist, they want to be these things, and it looks like it's so far from them, and I think it's so perfect. And they don't know that, it's like heartbreak, it's sacrifice, and it's really terrible at a lot of times. But how did you find that belief? What is it that sustains you going through this book? Like when you look at, you're going out every month and fighting these things, flowers are one of the things, right? But what else was it?
Well, okay, so the first thing I want to say is that we have come to see journalism as a professional thing, when that's not what I see it as mainly, first and foremost. I'm a storyteller. That's what I do. Very rarely I get paid to tell a story, but most of the time I don't. But because that's who I am as a human being, I need to tell my stories. And we all are storytellers in our own ways, and that's not about a job, that's not about getting paid, it's about expressing ourselves as human beings. I say that because I just started out blogging. I just created a WordPress.com blog, like all the other Joes out there who just wanted to say something and hope that 2 or 3 people heard me. It wasn't about a journalism career at the beginning. And to be honest with you, I barely have a journalism career now as far as it goes professionally. Like, guys, this book, I've been told, after 1 week of being out, is number 3 for Canadian journalists or Canadian writers on the bestseller list. It's right, so. And I am gonna, pat myself on the back for that. I'm extremely proud of that, and part of the reason I'm proud of it is because I have never held a full-time job in Canadian media, ever. And now that this book is number 3, and hopefully soon number 1, there is nobody banging on my door to be like, Desmond, come write for us. Desmond, come work for us. Because in the Canadian media landscape, I'm persona non grata now. I'm an outcast because everybody's like, he causes too much trouble. Yeah, he writes some hot stuff every now and again, but he's too much trouble. You don't want to hire him. He's going to make you look bad. He's going to call you a racist, all that. I am selling this book right now, not because of the Toronto Star, not because of Toronto Life magazine. I'm selling this book because I created an audience for myself. And that's what I want to encourage anybody who's a writer or a storyteller of any kind to do. Don't think about it as I have to get a job with a corporate entity and then they will validate my stories for me. Find your audience. You guys are my audience. You guys are the ones who are making this possible for me, and you're supporting me. You've been supporting me. So I want to say that first, is like, that's actually helped me survive, is like recognizing the difference between doing this as a profession and doing it from my own heart and spirit. But what helped me to survive? You and Reed taking me from the airport and taking me out for breakfast when I came to visit you guys.
The apple picking incident.
Yeah, that was fun. What helped me survive has been, having a black roommate who I could talk to and who supports me about these things. What helps me survive is having friends who literally, when I couldn't get out of bed sometimes, cooked food and brought it to my house and didn't ask for anything, just like want to know that you're okay. There are dark moments, you know that, Elle. Like, there's times where this stuff is like really, really challenging. And I think that the way that people like to talk about it or ask about it is they say self-care. If it was just myself, I would not have survived. I want to be really clear about that. I don't talk about self-care. People care for one another, and when I couldn't do stuff, people came for me and called me and checked in on me. And we need to actually create that for one another when we're doing this work. So all those people that Lynn asked to stand up this evening, and all of y'all who are too shy to stand up but you're still doing that work, you cannot do this on your own, and you don't have to. You shouldn't have to. What are we fighting for if we then have to go home and engage in some kind of self-care routine on our own? We have to build community as part of building our movements. So to the extent that I've had community, and I'm really lucky about that, I've survived.
I'm going to bring Lynn in a moment, but Fatouma, this one's for you. When you were doing your advocacy, so you didn't just do advocacy for your brother, you've continued to advocate on behalf particularly of kids in child welfare and kids who were in the system who were being deported. Why did you make that choice? Like, what moved you to do that? Why do you continue to fight even after your own family has been saved?
Because I feel like what me and my brother went through wasn't fair. If it wasn't for you, Desmond, and everyone else that helped, I think my brother probably would have been deported. So I just want to stop any other child that maybe went through the same thing that me and Abdul went through, just stop them from going through the same thing and like help them change their lives and like help Elmi, like, because he went through the same thing as us. And if it wasn't for us or like the people in Alberta as well bringing light to it, I think that he probably would have been deported as well. So that's why I do that. I just try to help people because I think that what we went through was just too much, especially Abdul. So I just try to help them not go through the same thing.
And Lynn, I want to bring you in on this discussion. This is kind of for all of us, but Desmond, your book is really in the heart of what we were calling, the age of Black Lives Matter. So however we want to date that, 2014, I'm claiming to the point where Jay-Z, takes a contract with the NFL, and that's the end of the Black Lives Matter movement. Not the movement that has existed for 500 plus years, but I mean that particular moment in time. So, and I know we've had this conversation, we're like, wow, like we lived through a time that while you're living through it, you're just doing it, and now we're already, I think, starting to reflect and say, what was that moment about, like this particular moment when we rose up? And of course, Lynn, you lived through many movements, but of course living through the movement in the 60s, living through what was here. So I thought we could also kind of talk about that together, this intergenerational struggle, the things that have come back. Everything in your book, I'm sure Lynn recognizes from, it's like all in Rocky's book too, it's the same issues from Lynn's own life as well. And I just find that really interesting how we keep, as we go through the struggle, how much we don't carry on from generation to generation, how much we try to relearn every generation, which is part of the problem, but also how we build that generational activism together. So maybe Lynn, you could start there, maybe your perspective as an elder activist who's been around for many, many decades, since like the age of 6 doing this work.
Actually, I'm going to go another direction that connects to that, because I was really pleased, Desmond, when I sat up here and look out into the audience here, of the intergenerational aspect of this audience. It doesn't always happen. True. Like, sometimes you're at events and it's all youth, for example, and the odd person from another era. And then other times it's all people that are elders with gray hair and all the bad. I cover mine up. So this is kind of neat. Like, just take a look around. It's kind of neat that we were all passionate about being here, and it puts in my mind a question like, why? How has he done this with this book? Has brought all of these people together from all different age groups and backgrounds. But then it kind of takes me back to the book, because you took 1 year, 2017, to chronicle the resistance for that particular year. But then I guess there would be a lot of the elders here that would say, well, listen, we did that like way back in 1910. Like, we did, we've been there, we've done that, we got the t-shirt, so you can't tell us because, and I do that sometimes myself. We protested way back when. We did our sit-ins, we did our, resistance. So I guess today, what I'm talking about in terms of this book and these different generations, too, that Alice talked about, what comes to light for you in terms of the work that you're doing now, like in 2017, and all these youth that are in this room today, and the kind of work that they might be doing? What kind of observations do you have? What kind of connections can we work together? Or are we going to work in silos? Or what's going to happen?
I hope we can all work together. That's the idea, right? And I think that one of the keys for me for honoring how long people have been fighting for some of this stuff is that, Lynn, a lot of people in your generation.
I'm not that old.
I didn't say that.
No, Jesus.
But a lot of people, maybe, for example, couldn't have imagined that Canada would have a black immigration minister, or that Canada would have black police chiefs, which is the new thing in Ontario now, is all the police chiefs have to be black, so that I guess racial profiling is their fault or something. Like, I don't know. I don't know why everybody's so excited about that, but, But the truth of the matter is that previously, those things weren't accessible. And so now we have them. People in your time have fought to make those things possible, have fought for concessions, which people are like, we have to give them something. They're still here fighting us. And so that's one of the things that they've now decided, because of struggles like your own, to give back, to be like, let's not let them get too angry. Let's not let them get out of hand. Give them something. So they're concessions. But they're not enough still, because the violence and the systemic racism and the profiling still goes on. So what I would say is, for those of us who are coming now and trying to pick up that struggle that's generational, we cannot be afraid to ask for exactly what we want. And let me give you 2 examples that have to do with Fatouma and Abdul's struggle. Okay? You mentioned Elmi. I want to make sure everybody in this room knows who Abdullahi Elmi is. He's a young man whose situation is like so similar to yours and Abdul's. Came here as a young person. He is of Somali heritage, but he doesn't have any status in that part of the world, and he doesn't have any status here either. Because Elmi came here, and when he was 9, he was taken in Ontario from his mom, taken into the child welfare system in that province. And when they take you into child welfare, when they apprehend you from your family, the government is now the only entity that can apply for your citizenship. Asha tried to apply for a citizenship for you and Abdul, and they said, you're not allowed, we're in control now, we're in charge. They did the same thing to Elmi. They said, well, now we are responsible for your citizenship, and then they just never applied for it. So as an older person with a criminal record, they said to him now, well, you're eligible for deportation. And they could have chosen to get him citizenship and made that impossible all those years before, but they never did. We fought, as you said, and we stopped Elmi's deportation too. But it's the same government that we had to fight for Abdul for that tried to do it to Elmi. So my question is, how many times do we have to do this? And do we not see that they're trying to exhaust us? They're trying to wear us out one by one fight at a time so that we give up. There are two things that we can ask of this government. Not ask, demand. First of all, we have to start asking for people to get status on arrival. When you come to this country, why are people good enough to come here to pick vegetables and break their back in Southern Ontario but not to have a pathway to citizenship? Why is that? Why? Status upon arrival. If you're good enough to be recruited from a refugee camp halfway around the world, why would we deny you status and say, we'll think about it? It doesn't make any sense, and it only leads to situations like the ones we've been talking about. Status upon arrival is key. The second thing is, the government could have committed after Abdul's situation or after Elmi's situation to just say, if you've been here since you were a child and you don't have citizenship, we're going to retroactively give it to you, period. But they haven't done that. Justin Trudeau and Ahmed Hussein and that administration, like I said, they don't want to do that. They're like, well, it would be really helpful for us in the future to still have the choice to send you away if we want to. Why? There's always a why. So what's the why? What does the government benefit by being able to pluck people who've been here since children and send them home? Well, what it benefits is that every other black person in this country has to live in fear that you're never really here for good, that you don't really belong, that we control you, and that you'd better keep your head down and behave. Otherwise, look what we can do to you, look what we can do to your family. So we have to make sure that people who have been here that long have protections and that we don't have to keep fighting this fight over and over and over again. People will tell you that those two demands are unrealistic. But what's really unrealistic is us spending the rest of our lives fighting these things one at a time. So, I would say that.
I was I'm going to Jamaica next week, so I'm following the Jamaican news, and they're having now a big kind of crisis with deportees. So I'm sure you know about the Windrush. I know people know this. So what had happened is people had come on the Windrush. So Jamaica, as a colonized nation by the English, after the war, they had basically were returning ships that had been in the Caribbean to England, and people sort of jumped on the ship, were given passage, and ended up in England. And since they were colonial citizens, many of them never got British citizenship, and they started deporting them the last couple of years. So because that was a huge scandal, because these were people that were citizens of empire that basically, as independence comes, are still denied citizenship in England and then are being deported. So in order to mask that, England is now doing deportations of criminal people. So they're chartering these planes out of London and just stacking them with deportees that have records. And this is basically a cynical move in order to cover up the fact that they were deporting these Windrush descendants who have been in the country for 2-3 generations. So, grandparents of people that they're going back. So in order to mask that, they're like, let's just send a bunch of deportees. Except it's an international human rights violation because Jamaicans' prisons are in such a bad condition. So they offered to give, I think it's $25 billion to Jamaica to build a new prison.
That's right.
So that people can be in the prison in Jamaica and can be deported in accordance with human rights law. And that's in England, but this is exactly the kind of thing we do as well. I mean, one of the things we were talking about with Abdul was how our government can't go to Somalia because it's too dangerous. So they pay human traffickers to take the deportees into Somalia. So in other contexts, we'll talk about how awful it is to traffic. If you're a black man pimping, you're a human trafficker, right? And everybody's a human trafficker. But our government is actually paying human traffickers in order to deport people into danger zones, and that's just part of our policy. So it's also how cynical these moves are, right? That part of when we speak to the government, and this is what people impose when they impose civility, this idea, and you and I have both, and we've all been, all of us, we've all been caught by the thing that's like, not now, not in that way,
You're being too
why
loud.
are you blocking Freeland from going in City Hall, youth activists,
That was awesome, by the way.
Yeah, like, why are you blocking the rails? There's always this idea that there's some other better, nicer, calmer, more civil way to do this thing to make change, right? But at the same time, that's under the pretense that our government is somehow civil, or that our government is somehow doing these things by the law politely. And of course, they're doing all these incredibly violent acts in these very deliberate ways, sending Ahmed Hussein into Nigeria to discourage people from coming to Canada. Like, let's send our black immigration minister to Nigeria because there's too many black people coming to Canada. Right. So, I mean, these are actual things that our government repeatedly does and has done and continues to do. And so when we as black people are trying to sort of enter into these good faith discussions or these negotiations or the closed door meetings that they love to force us into, with Abdul, they were always trying to get us into closed door meetings, which we rejected at every point. But that's this sort of theater of the civil and of the process, when in fact, of course, nothing they're doing is by the process.
For sure. I moved that in because you're talking about England, so I've actually really been following the whole Windrush situation, and I think the latest thing I was reading, that even the people that they're trying to say are criminals, or like the crime that they've committed is so small and insignificant that it would be something that there's no way you should be deported for. Like maybe they had an ounce of grass or something or other, and at the time it was so illegal. So yeah, it's a real problem. I wanted to bring it to a little bit, Desmond, back home, as they say, because sometimes we don't always make connections from a local perspective to a national perspective to a global perspective. And this audience, I say it every time, they know it wouldn't be me if I didn't mention reparations. Because it's always on the agenda. So it's like a double question, like, why Nova Scotia? Like, what's your passion in terms of Nova Scotia, and what happens here? And does it have a historical root of some kind? And how do we, from as an international African movement or global African movement, where do we connect in terms of some of the things that you've raised?
That's a really, really good question. So my family is from Sierra Leone. Hey, ba. Yeah. Cabo to my friend up there. Cabo, yes. So I didn't actually understand for a really long time what significance that had to this place for a long time, because nobody teaches us these things in school. But what I learned and what I share in this book is that it is extremely possible that this is my family's second tour in North America. And that I didn't know that when my parents immigrated here and had us here, me and my older sister. And what I mean is that the black loyalists who I talk about, who settled in what's now places like North Preston and Shelburne, they were enslaved. They were enslaved in the United States of America. They were enslaved in the New England colonies. And then there was a Revolutionary War between the British, who were where we are, and those 13 colonies. They were fighting for territory. And the British said, hey, enslaved black people, you're on the wrong side. What you want to do is you want to fight against these people who enslaved you with us. And if you do, in return, we're going to take you up to this place that we've got. And there you will be free. You will have an opportunity to have your own land. No one will be enslaving you. It's going to be great. And so obviously lots of black people did this. They fought with the British in the Revolutionary conflict, and then their papers were signed by the British to come and be allowed to live up here. And, well, there was a problem, because slavery was still legal in British North America, and in the entire British Empire, slavery was still legal, and it would still remain legal for another 50 years. So that promise to come up here and be free was not really honest. And the freedom that was offered to black loyalists was to come up here and, in many cases, to be re-enslaved, but also to be pitted against the white settlers who were on this territory, by the way, who just got here and were like, yeah, this is ours. So this is Mi'kmaq territory. We know that. But the white settlers were like, no, it's ours now. And we really don't appreciate these black people being here. So what we should do is we should start to create conditions that will make them want to leave. And that's exactly what they did. And the first chapter of this book is called Negro Frolics, because there was a law in Shelburne that forbid what they called Negro Frolics. And what were Negro Frolics in 1780s Shelburne? Black people dancing, black people congregating in too large numbers, black people drinking in public, black people gambling. And of course, there were no laws telling white people that they were not allowed to do these things. Those laws were only for us. The lands that were given, that were promised to black people, were the worst lands available with the least ability to farm. The jobs that were given to black people were of a lower pay, and this made white settlers even more angry, because they're like, oh, why would somebody hire me? Now they can hire this black person for even less, and now I don't get work. So I'm even more mad at these black people. Because of all these conditions, a whole bunch of these black loyalists ended up leaving. Where did they go?
Sierra Leone.
They went to a place that was later called Freetown, where my parents were both born, and then somehow found their way back here in the 1970s. And that's where my spiritual, ancestral, and, intellectual connection to this place really lies. The other reason is, like, I met Elle a few years ago, and I was just like, you're really awesome. And then Elle introduced me to so many other people who were really awesome. And I was like, I really like this place. I really like the vibe. I really like the culture. I like the distinctness of African Nova Scotian experience. And I want to talk about it as being part of Canada's Black experience, right? So it was that too. And as far as the global thing goes, I mean, that obviously ties in Canada, ties in the United States, ties in Maroons from Jamaica who also came to Nova Scotia and also left to go to Sierra Leone because they were like, we cannot handle this either. But not before they built the Citadel and refortified all kinds of British military stuff so that they would be nice and comfortable up here. The Maroons did a lot of work. So that ties in a whole bunch of like global history. And what I want to say about reparations, since you brought that up too, is that for me, reparations is like, we have to think of it as way more than give us some money. Reparations is like, I think the only proper comparison that I could make is when Indigenous peoples talk about reconciliation. It's not a one-time deal. It's not a deposit into your bank account. It's an ongoing process of decolonization. So for me as a Black person, fighting against the prison system is part of reparations because we are the ones who have paid, and people make money and have a livelihood so that we can stay in jail. We literally let white people live so that we can be enslaved still. People are allowed to be police officers in this country so that we can live in fear. So reparations is literally taking those things back. It's part of it. It's not just like, here's some cash and we're sorry. Nobody ever gets to say sorry for transatlantic slave trade. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for an amended commitment to like Black life specifically that says, you deserve, you are worthy. We have not treated you as worthy, and now we're going to start doing that, and we're going to continue doing that as a tradition of decolonization.
Wow, thank you. That was awesome. I think that's a good point, but we have one last little thing, a good point before we get the audience involved in answering some questions. But I have this burning question before, because when I got the book, and I've read the book, I've got it underlined, I've got little comments on the side, excuse me. But I had to come to grips with and battle with the title. Anybody have the same idea as me? The skin we're in. And I have my concept about what that means, but I don't know if it's the same as yours in giving it the title, or if you just did that so that it's whatever we think it is. And whose skin is it anyway? Is it black skin? Is it white skin? Is it everybody's skin? So can you just touch a bit before we open it up?
Asking the questions that people want to know. It's a good question. I will be honest with you. I didn't want this title.
Oh dear.
Yeah. See, you asked, so you're going to get it now, Lynn. Yeah, I wrote The Skin I'm in 2015 for Toronto Life magazine, and it was a personal essay about my experiences of racial profiling, and so it seemed like an appropriate title. And everybody I worked with after that, Charles Officer in the documentary that I did in 2017, my exceptional editor, Martha Kanya-Forstner, who helped me write this book, everybody wanted to use that title again. And I was like, nah, man, like we did that already. Like, I don't want to be only known as this like one kind of branded thing, but everybody kept being like, I want to use that title again. So when I worked with Charles and I were working on this documentary. We came out here and one day we were talking and I was like, so Charles, what are we going to call this thing? And he's like, what do you mean? I thought we were going to call it The Skin I'm In. And I'm like, that was a 2015 piece for Toronto Life, Charles. Like, and so we decided to compromise because he liked that title so much. And we said, okay, The Skin we're in. And then I wrote this book and I was like, Martha, we got to work on a title for this book. And Martha's like, what do you mean? I thought we were going to call it The Skin I'm In. And so the we for me is black people. The we is, this book is for us. Whether you are African Nova Scotian in this room, whether you are an immigrant from the continent, whether you are from the Caribbean or your family are, every black person in this room, this book is first and foremost for you. And you are the we. But, Lynn, I did also write this book for Canada. And for anyone in this country, whether they are black or not, who thinks that or who knows that the black liberation struggle is connected to their own. I honestly do believe that nobody is free until everyone is. And so I can't actually get free as a black person while our Indigenous brothers and sisters are in jail. That's not freedom for me. So that's also we, right? That learning journey that I'm on, seeing how the colonization of this country affects Indigenous people, like they are in there too. And there's a whole chapter in this book because July of 2017 was Canada 150. And what happened during Canada 150? Indigenous people were like, oh, hell no, right? Like, absolutely not. And they put up an incredible amount of resistance that really showed us what colonialism after 150 years really means. And I learned from that, so that's here too. Anybody who wants to be part of the liberation struggle is included in that we, whether they are black or not.
We're wrapping up, and we have something we need you to do with us. But I just want to say this to you, Desmond, and I'm going to tell you a little L secret, that when you were first coming out here making the documentary, I mean, I knew a little bit about you. And to be honest, I was like, man, dudes just have to like breathe and they get documentaries made on them. Like, black women be out here with nothing. But I was like, man, but I'm still gonna this person's coming to my community. I'm gonna show them love and hospitality, So we showed you a lot of love when you came here. And obviously from that time, you've grown to be such a comrade, somebody who's held all of us down. There's so many people in this room who have interviewed with Desmond and he's told your story. I mean, Fatouma, so many people that you've spoken with and then amplified voices for. And you've always worked so hard to amplify the voices of black women, queer black people, trans black people, indigenous people. And we're just so proud that you're here tonight, Desmond. It's been such a long road for you. I know how hard it was to get this book out, and my heart couldn't be fuller for you. I couldn't be prouder for you. I mean, this is where I just it's like my book. I feel so happy that you are here tonight and they're being celebrated in the way you always should have been celebrated. We love you so much, Desmond.
I love you too, Al. Thank you so much.
Okay. So this is a quick.
Wait, we have a thing we need people to do with us.
Sorry. We got to do a thing here.
Sorry.
Because the work is ongoing, and I've been doing this. What I'm about to do with you all in the other places. We launched in Toronto, and I've been this week also to Ottawa and to Montreal, and we've been on a little bit of a petition drive for somebody who's in this room who I would like to actually honor right now. And if it's not too much for you, Santina, I would like you to come down here, please. Sit down. Okay. So check it out, everybody. We've just met for the first time, and it's so wonderful to finally meet you in person. Let's see by a show of hands how many of you know Santina's story. Wow. Well then, my work here is a little easier because what I would like you to do now is take out your phone. Take out your phone. And I want you to go to the Google, and I want you to Google Santina's first name, Santina, and then put a space, and then put change.org. Santina, Santina, then a space, and then change.org. And you should get one of the first 2 or 3 results. Yes, I see people nodding. You see a petition there from change.org? I want you to click on that petition if you can see it. Help people next to you if they can't find it, if they can't see it. I want you to go here. We have been so blessed because Elle started this petition, a week ago? A week ago. I was launching my book in Toronto last week. And we talked about it. We'd spoken with you, Santina, and saying we wanted to do a petition. And Elle got it out right before my launch. And I did what I'm doing here with all of you. I invited everybody to search for it. They did. And then they signed it. And they shared it on their social media. They shared it on Facebook, on Instagram. They shared it on Twitter. They put it through email lists. Who can see how many signatures the petition has and shout it out to me?
Wow.
What do you guys think about that? Did you know that? Santina didn't even know that until right now. We've gotten over 5,000 signatures on that petition in a week. In a week. The petition asks for, well, it doesn't ask for anything. It demands 3 things. Number 1, that the charges against our sister be immediately dropped. Has to happen. Number two, that the people who are actually responsible for crimes that night, all those police officers, are themselves charged by the Crown. When people ask me, like, Desmond, what can we do? What can we do to help? We've heard these stories. What can we do to help? Isn't it obvious? Isn't it obvious that police officers who hurt members of our community should be held accountable and should lose their positions of authority? Isn't that obvious? And the third thing that we want, because Walmart Canada got off real easy in all of this, and it's their responsibility that started all of this. We've talked about that quite a bit. You talked about that on my radio show also. Walmart were the ones that chose to do this really terrifying security move and to try and criminalize you being in that store that day. They have not said one word of substance since that time, but they did ban Santina from every Walmart in Canada. And we really think that they should not only lift that ban, but that they should compensate our sister for what they did. So before we do a Q&A, I would ask all of you, please sign that petition, and not just that, share this petition. But I'm going to ask you to do one other thing besides signing and sharing the petition. When is your court date next week?
February 19th,
What time?
10 a.m.,
Where?
the Halifax Provincial Court on Spring Garden Road.
Does everybody here know where that is?
Yes.
Look how many people came here for me this evening. I could not be more honored and humbled. Do not let our sister go to court alone next week. A lot of people across the country have been signing this petition, and we're going to keep going with it, but it is extremely important that you show up to court next week to show the Crown that we don't tolerate what was done and that we want those charges dropped immediately. I want you guys to organize. If there are organizers in this room, I want you to think about ways that you can get people off work, that you can get people to have a babysitter, that you can shift some schedules around for a few people. We need to get people to that courtroom next week at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. Thank you. Spring Garden Road. You guys gonna help us do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very,
Oh wait,
very
we
much.
have to do the chant.
Oh yeah. How do we do that? I didn't.
You can like
You
pan
teach 'em.
across the thing.
Okay.
You need a phone.
Okay.
So we want you want to make a quick video. So we have a chant for you. You get to memorize things right now. So we're gonna practice. So the chant, the first line is no racist cops. No racist shops. This is a Darius chant. I see him waving in the back. And Darius, you've adapted your chant. So it's no racist cops, no racist shops. We won't stop till the charges are dropped. No racist cops, no racist shops. We won't stop till the charges are dropped.
Okay.
And I really want to shout out Darius Mishahi for like many, many chants over time. Darius, stand up, man. Like the master chant writer at our protests. If you wonder why the chants sound so good, it's because Darius is out here. If you wonder why the banners look so good, it's because Sakura is out here. So yeah, so let's we want to get that on video. So how are we gonna do this, Desmond?
Yeah, so what I want to do is, what I want to do, will you, if you could, I'd like you to actually sit right here. I should have been way more clear. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like
And then you
And
guys
when I say that, or sorry, when Santina says that, what are you guys all going to say?
No racist cops, no racist shops. We won't stop until the charges are dropped.
You're going to do that 2 times and then cheer as loud as you can. Is everybody ready?
Yep.
Are you ready?
I'm gonna get backup video. Just
Yeah.
Wait, I'm slow. Okay.
You ready? Okay. Sorry.
My name is Santina Rao, and us, we'll have a message for the Crown of Nova Scotia.
No racist cops, no racist shops. We won't stop until the charges are dropped. We'll racist cops, no racist cops. We won't stop till the charges are dropped.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
We have time for some questions. And when we say questions, we mean questions, please. And we do want to leave time. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I know people want their books signed, so we don't want people to be here till like midnight. So we want some time for you, but try and keep it short. Said I, the biggest hypocrite in the world.
Okay.
And while the mics are going around, I want to say thank you to King's College for hosting this event, but especially I want to say thank you to our friend Paul running with the mic right now from King's College Bookstore. The bookstore approached me months ago. Paul approached me being like, we know your book is coming. We're really excited. We really want to host an event. I am so thrilled to have been able to partner with you on this. Thank you so much for all the work you did, all the promotion that you did to make this possible and to get everybody out here tonight. And everybody, please support the bookstore and please buy a book.
So the mics are available. I know there's burning questions.
Hi, my name is Jamie Keats. So first off, I really want to thank you, Desmond. I was born a Canadian citizen, although I was born in South Africa, and I lived in South Africa for most of my life. And the way I came to understand myself as a black Canadian was basically by watching your development. Most of you going up to the police, for example. I remember one time they stopped this guy and you went up and informed him of his rights. I saw that on YouTube. All the interviews you did on the agenda. That's basically how I pretty much came to understand, my blackness and myself in the Canadian context. So thank you very much for that. So I just wanted you to comment a little bit on, so like you mentioned, there's a false dichotomy basically between the fact that journalists are supposedly neutral, but at the same time, but they can't be activists. Like you have to be neutral, but the corporations can endorse specific political parties, and that's not considered neutral, like Post Media, for example. So I just wanted you to elaborate maybe a little bit more on that, using maybe something in your experience in terms of that. The other thing I wanted to mention was, for example, or to comment on is like the hierarchies in the society, even in the context of like citizens who are born like we are hierarchized. Like for example, I have a child. That child does not have Canadian citizenship, even though I was born a Canadian citizen. And we've been separated for like 3 years because of this fact. And even at the point when this was changed, we never had representation, the first generation of Canadians born abroad, even though of course we know Canada is a colonial state and it has no right to the land here. But just in general, you can understand, like, it's almost like the society has deemed my father a race traitor, and I'm something, like, I remember reading the Senate, like, meeting, the committee minutes and things like that, and the way people were describing us as a threat. Canadian citizenship has to be worth something, which ended up with me not being able to be with my child and missing her whole formative years. So I just wanted you to maybe comment a little bit more on that as well.
I'll take, just because of time, I'm going to take the first part specifically. So I think a really good example of how journalism can never be so-called objective or neutral is who funds journalism, right? If somebody's giving money to something, they're influencing the way that thing is going to be done. So if I am fundraising for something and I have donors, my donors might want to contribute to what I'm doing, but they might be like, now, Desmond, I'm giving you this money, but I would really like you to spend it in this way. And that's fair, right? That's how people negotiate those things. So if you're in corporate media, your Bell Media, your National Post, your whomever, your job is not to tell the truth or to produce excellent journalism. Your job is to get money for your corporation, first and foremost, period. If there are all kinds of oil companies that buy advertising in your newspaper or your radio station, are the oil companies really going to want you to do all these exposés about how they're poisoning water, about how they're using military to kick people off their land? No. But those same companies will tell me that I'm not being objective because I'm a black person fighting for other black people, right? It doesn't make any sense. If you're taking money from a certain lobby and a certain industry, you have a pressure on you now not to make them look bad, because then they won't want to give you their money anymore. It's just natural. So this is why I say don't buy into this notion of objective media, because the people who are saying that they're objective work for the telephone companies that get paid, for example, when people make collect calls out of jail. Bell Canada, had you guys seen the Bell Let's Talk about prison stuff that was going on? Because Bell Canada makes money every time people call out from jail. So obviously Bell Canada, as the one doing that, when it's talking about mental health and all of these things, it doesn't want people to talk about, well, how are you treating people with their mental health when they're incarcerated? People have interests. I just want us to be honest about what those interests are. You cannot be neutral when you're taking money from these places. You can't report on them objectively, in the same way that if my mom goes out tomorrow and decides that, I don't know, she's gonna rob a bank, I can't be objective about my mom's bank robbing because I'm probably getting some of that cash. Let's just be honest. So it's the same with corporations. And I think we really have to do well to remember that. Your media, Global, Bell, Shaw, all these are corporations. They did not start so that they could tell the truth. They started to make corporate profit, and they happen to own media companies. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question over here.
Yeah. My question is, since you left the Star, how do you feel about the way they are covering stories of black people? Do you think they are doing enough or fair coverage of black stories?
This is a spectacular question. I was told, as is cited in this book, so before I did that protest in April of 2017 that the Star wagged their finger at me for, before that ever happened, several months before, when I was still working there, I got a call to meet with the publisher of the company, the highest person in the company. I was really scared. Some of you guys, you have a boss, and then your boss has a boss, and then your boss's boss has a boss. And you're like, if that person wants to talk to you, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
you don't want to deal with that person because they're not on your level on a day-to-day basis, and suddenly they want to talk to you. So this publisher wanted to talk to me. And we went out for lunch. I gave him a meeting, and he took me out for lunch, and he says, "You're writing about race too often, Desmond." I had to hold that in for a year until I finally resigned and never tell anybody that he had put that pressure on me to try and get me to stop covering issues of anti-black racism so frequently. Right after I left, like 1 week after I left, the Toronto Star hired Shri Paradkar, and they gave her the title of race and gender columnist. But the black person was writing about race too often. I want to say this because it's not personal to Shri. I don't have any personal beef with her or her work. But why is she, as a non-black person, allowed to do this work and benefit from it and have a job and a full-time salary, and I am not? And so, has Shri done some good and important reporting? She absolutely has. But it hurts me that they didn't want a black person doing that work. And I think it was strategic on their part because they know that since Shri's not black, she can't own the subject in the way that we can. She still has to kind of toe the line a little bit, right? So it was very strategic on their part. And they continue to have a lot of excellent reporting at the Toronto Star, but without black editorial voices to actually bring this stuff home, I think it's a waste. I think it's a wasted opportunity, unfortunately. Maybe one more? I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
that
just thinking
sounds
about
good.
time. I want to
Yeah.
get people out and I want to sign
Just
some books.
one
So.
more.
Can I just welcome our new panelist first?
Sorry, where did that come from?
Up over here.
Oh, hi.
Just want to say welcome to the new panelist for a start as well.
Oh, yes, welcome. Please go ahead.
So I'm British. I moved over here like a year ago. I'm just studying. But the issues we raised tonight and indeed last week, I hadn't honestly heard much about them. I knew this was an issue. I've been honestly amazed and shocked at the scale of things, and especially Santina, at how bad things are here, but certainly with racial profiling and such. If I haven't heard about it, my worry is how many other people haven't, and how can we get the message out to them more effectively? It's really a worry for me, actually. How can we get it out more effectively? Because there's so many people who don't know, and even in Canada wouldn't know.
So I've written a book.
Well, that's a start, yeah. That's a start. But
I'm teasing you a little bit.
Oh, no, I know.
But no, seriously, I want to say this for all the folks who are not black in this room, and even for those of you who are black, who may have families who, when they hear about these stories, say that it's our fault as black people that these things are happening to us, because that also happens. It starts in your own family and in your own community. So you don't have to go proselytizing to some stranger that you didn't know about issues that you're just still learning about. That's not the expectation. But I think you should do that within your own family and within your own friend group. And that is a difficult thing to do because the people around you probably don't want to hear about what's in this book. And you have to make it so that they don't have that choice. So that if they want to be around you and be your friend and be your family member, that from time to time, they will have to hear about these things. They will have to be reminded that you value these things and that you expect them to value it also. Because if we can't do it within our own circles as practice, right? If we can't do it in our own families and friend circles, how do we actually expect to be proper advocates in the world? It's a very difficult thing to face off in your own, and believe me, everybody have that uncle, right? Everybody has that uncle that at the dinner table you're just like, please stop saying these things. But it's a good opportunity for us to work on the people who are close to us. We have the most influence, by the way, with the people who are close to us, our family members, our friends, and our colleagues at work. So don't think you have to go converting the world. Start where you live, start where you work, start where you spend the most time and where you have the most close relationships, and let's work outwards from there. That's what I would say.
Thank you. So, folks, that concludes our program for this evening. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask my fellow panelists if there's any last departing words or message that you want to leave with our audience this evening. No, you're okay? Then I thank all of you for attending. Desmond is available for signing books. We thank King's College for having us here, and also for, I believe there's still books for sale around somewhere, is there not? And so you who don't have yours, be sure to pick it up. It's an opportunity to get a signature. It'll be worth a lot of money.
I lied. I did forget that the book Until We Are Free, which has Dr. Amishree Dryden, our current chair of Black Studies, in it. I'm in it as well. It's a book on the movement for Black lives in Canada. There will be a book launch for that on March 12th. Stay tuned to Amisree's Facebook / Twitter / social media for more details. Amishree, stand up for a second. And Desmond he can just stay there and people can come to him up here for having the book signed.
He needs to go to the washroom. Okay, everybody, thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause.